It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 100th episode of Pure Performance.
Pure Performance.
Wait, you don't sound like Andy. Where's Andy? Andy, are you there? Did we lose Andy?
I am.
Oh my God.
No, I'm still here. But the thing is, never ever has it happened, except Mark is on the show, that the guest is speaking before the hosts are speaking.
Mark is the only rude guest.
I know.
Right, so who's this Mark fella? Who's this Mark fella? I don't think people know who he is. Mark Tomlinson, some performance guy, right?
I think he must have accidentally received the link to the recording here.
Yeah, I snuck in. I'm like a homeless person that walks in off the street. Hey, buddy, can I run some load tests for you, man?
Exactly.
that happened to me once.
So Mark, so obviously this is listeners will understand right away that this is going to be a very serious discussion today, a very serious episode. Mark, for those few, like 2 or 3 people in the world that don't know who you are, let them know who you are.
I am the Performacologist, the Performance Sherpa, Perf Sherpa. Somebody
I'm
called
the Alpha
me,
and the Omega.
No, another person referred to me on Slack as the perforator. And I'm like, that's not, that has a whole other implication, I think, to like, you could, that's like paper. You could perforate the paper. No, I'm a now 27-year performance testing founder of the PerfBytes Podcast, inspiring muse of the Pure Performance Podcast that you all are celebrating. Congratulations to both of you making 100 episodes. And I mean that from the deepest part of my soul.
The deepest, darkest, most awful part of my soul, your soul, right?
Yeah, right. That place where old VU-Gen versions go to die.
So I think we have to say thank you, obviously, because for people that don't know, you truly inspired us to do this, and we have. Well, Brian, you now even also run a show on PerfBytes,
right?
And I remember before Pure Performance, you guys invited me on PerfBytes. I think back in the days we talked about SharePoint. Right? Was that the first episode?
It was. Well, it was not the first episode we had. Howard, you went to Howard's house.
Howard's house, yeah, out in Lexington.
Yeah, and what did you have for breakfast?
Probably pancakes
and some bacon.
And some bacon, yeah. And I'm pretty sure a lot of syrup on it. And it was breakfast, so there was there was probably no beer involved, at least not.
No. Yeah, that's so we had started the PerfBytes thing on about 2012, and I think it was the end of 2012. And Andy, we had you on the show kind of right off the bat. And James and I were both independent performance geeks in the world. And it was that was the first we thought, is anyone really doing a serious performance testing, performance engineering show? And we couldn't find a lot. There were casual things, topics here and there. A few people have tried, back and forth. So it just started for us. And then Andy, after you joined us, I think even maybe came to a couple live shows. Brian, I think you joined us in Denver for something when we were there with an SDPCon. And shortly thereafter, I think, Andy, we talked about, hey, would Dynatrace want to ever sponsor, the show? And we got invited to do Perform. So we went to Perform 2014 or 2015, I think.
It was still back in Orlando, right?
Yeah. And did a live, James and I just went there and did a live thing, and it was awesome. And so from that point forward, you guys had said, well, maybe we could not. And I said, why don't you start another one? Because, competition is good in certain ways, but it's also inspiring just to cover so many different topics, because you guys could drill down the Dynatrace sort of the digital transformation message was just coming out. Ruxit was still incubating and hadn't become Dynatrace as you know it today. So there were really exciting things going in that direction. And having more people with more topics and more things to cover is always a good thing. So I thought that was really good.
Yeah, I remember when it was an STP con, I went out to meet you, and we were at that, what's the name of the place? It has the bowling alley and the arcade, whatever. And you said to me, you should do a podcast. And I remember my first reaction to you was, do people listen to podcasts?
No.
Apparently they do. Yeah, apparently they still don't. But the funny thing was I went to my boss then and said, hey, I think it'd be a good idea. Maybe we can do a Dynatrace-based podcast. And he was like, nope.
Nope.
And then you talked to Andy, and Andy said, hey, Brian and I should do a performance-based podcast, because Andy knew I knew how to record.
Yeah.
And then they were like, yep. And basically, because Andy came aboard, right? So Andy, I want to thank you for coming on board, because, obviously I wouldn't be able to do this without you, literally. But also you bring in all the guests, and I'd say you're really the star of the show. I control the knobs and make my jokes here and there. But Andy, it's wonderful having you to do this with.
No, thank you, but I think it's a team effort, right? I mean,
it's always a team effort.
Obviously, the combination of the two of us, inspired by Mark and PerfBytes.
Or like Laverne and Shirley, or
Does that make me Fonzie because I'm from the other show?
No, you're Carmine.
Carmine. Okay, did they make a cameo? The crossover show that came on to Laverne. There's Lenny and Squiggy, but I thought the Fonz made a crossover.
There was always some crossovers, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're not the Fonzie.
And then, but there's more now, right? I know that Senor Performo, he has his own show now, right? He's doing podcasting.
Yeah.
Right?
Leandro Melendez, Senor Performo from Mexico this year. And things are taking off. He just joined me in STPCon in Boston, which was great. We have some sponsorship inquiries, and his market is a little bit different. It goes beyond, to your point, Brian, not a lot of people listen to just audio in Latin America. A lot of that is video, a lot of YouTube, and just the popularity. People spend a lot more time watching video stuff. We're thinking that Leandro, who has a face for radio, he has a marvelous handlebar mustache. He's fantastic for doing that. But we also we welcomed him not just to expand the language base to performance engineers that don't speak English as their native language, but also technology is so much dominated by English, as you know, Andy. Speaking two different languages, you also are like, hey, I can speak two other languages. Most of the tech talk is in English, so I'm still waiting for the German version of Pure Performance to come out.
Oh wow, yeah,
all German.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. I have a problem. Actually, I have problems when I have to present my content in front of a German audience and have to speak German, because for me, German is basically a second language, because my native dialect is Upper Austrian, or Mühlviertlerisch, as we
That's
call
right.
it.
Yeah.
So to help people understand, that would be like if you come from Texas and you're talking and you're going to speak in like Minnesota, right? It's totally different language, so.
Right, or it's every word that James Pulley says. Is that English? Is he speaking English? I thought it was Portuguese.
Yeah.
But to your point on Senior Performo, one of the things he was saying, one of the things that I love about his show is that performance is not at least according to him, right? Performance is not as much of a focus in Latin America. It's not as much of a talk about practice. It might be done, but it's not as much of a, doesn't have any spotlight or much notice. Kind of similar. It's been like that for ages and ages here until recently, right? Yeah. So he's helping try to find and build that community, which is really awesome, except for in Brazil where they speak Portuguese. I actually have a colleague who is in Brazil and was asking me about how to get set up for podcasting, because he's like, you got all of Brazil who doesn't really understand too much Spanish. They understand English, but it'd be much better for them to do Portuguese. So I just want to throw it out there. Anybody in any, in any language, start up a podcast. The great thing about Leandro, not to keep, tooting his horn and all, but he didn't come in with any real audio experience. And he just picked it up like instantly. I remember when he first did his little demo one, we were like, wow, that sounds, you're ready to go.
He's a natural.
Yeah.
That way. Yeah. And also, much like you, Brian, you kind of produce the audio that you want, the sound you want, with kind of little creative segues, background music, interesting kinds of things, the way you've done it. You get your own theme music, which is very cool. And yeah, Martha and I did as usual, because Martha will help out with any of the PerfBytes voiceovers. She did a lot of the Spanish voiceover in Leandro's intro music.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
So the sexy voice of PerfBytes, sexy Irish voice, did a sexy Spanish Irish voice of PerfBytes. Exactly. So awesome. So we're expanding languages.
Right.
And speaking, as we mentioned as well, there's a couple web performance podcasts that are out there. Mm-hmm. I'd have to go look up the actual thing. So I've seen that. They're not 100% performance or web perf, but they do cover kind of front end UI, UX kind of podcasts. So they cover some of that. And Joe Colantonio just has the test guilds now.
Right. That's the new one, right?
Yeah, it's a new one. Leandro was actually his first guest. And I'll be on there soon. So we'll see how that works out. But I mean, again, he's got the Joe Colantonio Test Talks approach, a lot of interview stuff and very topic driven kinds of things. So that's kind of cool. So see that
also
grow.
We have Henrik from Neotis.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's doing a lot of the obviously they just had VPAC, and in podcasting wise, he doesn't have his own show from a podcast perspective, but he's been obviously a guest on all of our podcasts, I believe.
Yeah, didn't he used to be the performance chef? Didn't he have the in the kitchen?
Yeah, he has the kitchen. He does have the kitchen, but that's video.
It's YouTube.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think you should keep the performance chef going on, because that's to me. I always think of the Swedish chef, even though he's not Swiss or he's not Swedish. Those are two very different things. But yeah, so it's the Muppet Show, the Swedish chef that you could be for performance.
He could pull it off.
Hey, just reading a little bit of the chat that we have going on here on the side. I think I just noticed that people are actually chatting in here. Well, the three of us are chatting. Yeah. Well, Mark is chatting and nobody's listening to you.
I know.
But now I read it, and you're right. I won't read out loud what you said, but besides the where we came from, and there's other stuff out there. So people check out. There's more than just PerfBytes and Pure Performance. A lot of great stuff. And if you feel encouraged by what we've been doing, and you speak another language and you would like to do that in your language, feel free to reach out to us. Ask us for advice.
Mark especially.
Exactly. He's the one that's all the good advice. But Mark, besides you being, the inspiration for the podcast, you've also been inspiring, obviously, with the work that you've been doing. I just told you I had 2 meetings today where I always used a slide that I kind of borrowed from you from one of the webinars we did years ago, where you talked about continuous performance back then when you were at PayPal. And just to rephrase the story as far as I remember, at least that the way I tell it, hopefully it's still kind of accurate. Yeah. But the way I tell it is that you were kind of getting bored of people asking you run this test, and then you ran the test, and then you are doing the analysis and giving back the results. And then you build automation where people could open up a Jira ticket, and then you build automation that picked up these Jira tickets where basically they formulated the request of what they wanted to get tested and what they wanted to get performance feedback on. And then your automation was taking that request, deploying the app, running the test, and then on that same ticket, pushing back results. So making performance as a self-service almost available, right, to different people. And this story resonates extremely well with the people I talk to. I mean, I know you've been doing this a couple of years back when you were at PayPal, but I think you just said before we hit the record button here that you're still kind of wearing this continuous performance hat at your company. You're kind of lighthouse that is kind of preaching it and implementing it. Now, can I ask you, so continuous performance, I think it's very inspiring for everyone, but people still have a problem actually getting there. So can you tell me a little bit more on what you do right now in your new role? How do you get continuous performance into the mindsets, into the organization? Has anything changed then since you left, your previous gig, PayPal? in your approach to continuous performance? What is there for us to learn?
I think the one biggest thing I'm seeing right now is people talking about, do I even need to run a load test? Like, could I do continuous performance just measuring each environment and not actually having build scripts, run load, test data, like the essential old project that you would do to build a load test, and then have that predefined load test built and running on a continuous schedule or on demand, like you said, Andy. Like, you put in a Jira ticket if your company's run by Jira, and sometimes the robots in the company, human beings, only do things if you give them a Jira ticket. So if you can say this what type of test you want to run, just the baseline test, and then that's a predefined baseline test that runs all the scripts we know about, all the apps we know about. But I'm seeing now even people say, look, we talk about early performance testing where it's relative to the previous builds, what's the trend of performance in a given environment, even if that environment is really small. So you're in QA, you've got functional regression tests running, and they always run maybe potentially in the same order. So the profile of usage over the course of, let's say it takes an hour to run all of your scripts, is going to look pretty similar. And you could get other metrics like hardcore metrics, number of database calls, number of requests. And couldn't I just measure and compare the run of the functional test cases? Now, back in the old day, you have to build a load test and the transaction has to go all the way to the database and back and has to do all this. But I see people who are like, I'm not even building all the scripts. I'm just monitoring my integration environment, my UAT environment. I'm monitoring any automated, very similarly repeated regression type run in automation, and just comparing the performance sort of high level across that stack. And then they get other metrics that they can trend in there, pull it into some sort of graph, or set some SLAs or some alerts on the graph thresholds that would say, all right, well, how long does it take to run the first 10 scripts? And those are our high priority transactions. And all right, if that takes longer, it shouldn't. But why did it take longer? And mostly I see the questions that people are asking are not that good old absolute, here are my performance requirements. You have to prove, pass or fail, that we've met those. And then you create the scenarios to that. It's more like, hey, keep us on the good path. And things are going to change over time. So, 15 seconds after we put our performance requirement on the table, it all changes. So to me, the single biggest change was doing things repeatedly and continuously, taking performance measurements and trending them and comparing them is the single most disruptive thing to classic performance testing that I've ever seen. It almost pulls the performance concepts from APM, old school APM, and drags them all the way up into the life cycle. Because now it's like, then you do need synthetics at some point. You might say, I really do want to generate 10x load on a stress test because I want to do a what if, and maybe I only do that 2-3 times a year or more. Holiday readiness is a good example. Like, we don't have production load that goes to holiday volumes to 2x, 3x. So we do need some synthetics that do that. So it doesn't, I'm not saying it replaces classic load testing, but for me, continuousness in performance is like the biggest thing that's changed, to the point where people now are like, can I start just measuring and not really do classic JMeter load tests, NeoLoad load tests, a load runner? And I'm like, yeah, of course. I mean, anyone that asks me, should I measure performance? I'm like, yes, absolutely. All the time, at every point. Why wouldn't you? And so to me, that's still huge. And the things I'm chewing on now, I maybe, let's say 2-3 times a month, I will get a special request for a special situation load test. In the payment space, there's a lot of things in real-time fraud. And so, like, let's say, for example, you want to do blacklisting of a set of cards. You find some operation in a hotel room that's like, hey, we were cranking out fake credit cards and blah, 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 and they're going to go use them. You want to be able to immediately blacklist those cards. Well, that's a pretty intensive thing if you're talking about a really giant payment system in a giant database. So how do I screen those blacklists when I'm running 2-3 300-400 transactions per second through a single engine, and I have to check every single transaction for a blacklist. So there's I'll get a special case where my architects or the business are nervous about something, and that's what generates a special stop the presses load test. So to me, that means continuous performance is sort of your everyday, make sure everything's on an even keel, and you get to give more attention to the things that actually put the business at risk. And it becomes like exception-based load testing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I have a question though. I first of all, a comment and then a question. First, a comment. The kind of trending and looking at certain metrics. This reminds me of the performance signature that Thomas Steinmauer, one of our chief performance architect, right? He basically said after he also has a continuous performance environment, and he's basically deploying a new build every night, and then he's always looking at let's say 20, 30, 50 metrics, and instead of doing it manually, he just pulls them out through an API and then puts in a database and then charts it and does basic regression analysis. So that's what he's been doing, and the whole concept of the performance signature is also what you are saying. It's like, yeah, we want to see where things are going and kind of keep us on the happy path and inform us in case something goes completely strange. But other than that, we're probably good. So I think he was also spot on with his approach. But now I have a question to you. When you say, well, we just monitor, we don't care about the load tests, and you do this in a pre-prod environment, you do have to have some type of load though on it continuously, which means you would really just go with your functional test. Is that what I heard earlier?
No, I even see it happening within the dev environment during unit tests. In some cases, we've added a special phase after the unit test where you run 100 transactions as fast as you can with a single thread. And you measure the elapsed time, not just the individual time, and just graph that over time, trend that number. Another one is just run some small number of threads equally, 10 threads doing 100 transactions as fast as you can to do thread contention, concurrency type issues, but at very small scale. And the database guys are like, big deal. Yeah, sure, of course. The database guys, that's not real load compared to prod. But then I'm talking to the database guys, and they're like, well, we already have all of our metrics with all the trending and all the graphing. We're looking at it through Dynatrace or whatever tool they're using. And so they're like, we're already in touch with that. We're just interested in special scenarios when we're going to do whack an index somewhere, and it's going to take forever to run and impact performance if we're going to have to do some massive update. So again, their need for load testing, what if scenarios, what's going to happen, become very exceptional and higher risk. And then they're the number one thing that pisses off any database person is like, oh, that stupid developer didn't catch an N+1 problem, another database contention problem, and they didn't know what they were doing. So usually you can catch most of those in smaller environments. So yeah, dev QA are perfectly good places to be measuring that and trending it. And you don't need super extra huge load tests the way, you see like the old COE, tearing down the old COE that had, here's our pipeline. You have to give me your non-functional requirements. It takes me 2 to 3 days per script. How many scripts do you want? Give me your test data. I mean, that's 10, 15 years old, the COE model. And there's companies that do that today, spending lots of money. And here's the question I got recently, even at the SDPCon, which is somebody saying, if I'm doing this early performance testing, do I still need to do, like you're saying, do I still need to do load testing? And I'm like, well, try just doing this early performance sampling and measurements and maybe these small kinds of unit performance tests. And after a month or two, start asking the COE, hey, how many bugs have you guys found in the last month or two? And they might say, well, we found 2 or 3 at the database because, we can run contention on the database. But for the most part, we're finding almost no bugs. And a lot of big, heavy, late game performance testing is more of a safety net. I guess it's more of I'm going to hold your hand reassurance. It's a soft touch. Hey, let's feel strong and confident, and nothing wrong with that. But if you really look at sort of defects found and fixed, I just don't see it happening with the COE guys anymore. 2 of the people at SDPCon were like, we had a COE and we kind of tore it down and pushed everyone into the dev teams, shifting left. So I think that's really happening now.
And I think it's important for the performance teams to understand that there's a lot that they can bring and offer to those dev teams and everything, right? Because knowing what to look for, knowing how to look for it, knowing what tests make sense, even if it's just a single unit test, right? An N+1 query problem, you can see that with a single run. But knowing to look for it there and knowing where all the gates that we need to gather this information from before it gets to production, so that we can find these issues. And to a large part, I agree. If you have, and there's a lot of ifs around this, right? But hopefully some of these ifs bring the other ones into fruition. If you have a good pipeline, if you have a good, a fast delivery system where if an issue is found, let's say it doesn't get found till production, but if an issue gets found, you can push a fix in pretty rapidly. Right, then you can start reducing the need to do those COE type of tests, because you're going to find most of those issues. And if something does slip by, if you can get something out quick enough, then you start balancing the how many hundreds of thousands of dollars are we spending on COE versus 2 days and we can keep resetting a server every 6 hours and get the fix in.
If you're actually realizing a vulnerability, a risk in production, the speed of remediation can be so fast now that the duration when you're at risk is much, much shorter, where it used to be maybe weeks or months to fix something like that. And nowadays it can be, you can be a matter of minutes. But
that's if you have that set up. One thing I notice when I talk to a lot of our prospects is, and it's always funny because Andy does all these amazing talks. I hear you doing all these amazing talks, and there's all these fun, wonderful ideas going around at all the conferences and everything. And then you get on with the real world people at one of our prospects or a client, and it's like, we're still running LoadRunner. We're looking for another tool, and it takes us this minute. It's the whole I don't want to say unicorny thing, but it's theory versus practice, and there's a lot of people who want to get there. So I think all the speeches and all the talks and everything are extremely, extremely important to keep giving everybody that inspiration. But it's still a very, very slow adoption. It's unfortunate.
And I think if I were to list 2 barriers to the adoption of modern performance techniques, and continuousness is part of them. The one barrier is just permission. They don't perceive the role of a performance person. You'd be stranded in the infrastructure team. The budget is allocated. The HR department says these guys look like infrastructure guys to me. Let's put them over here. Don't they live in production and ops and infrastructure? So one is just, I will never give permissions to those people to shift their work into earlier environments. That's why, Andy, I think maybe the clinics you'll see devs showing up to some of the performance clinics. And that shift, that's a big thing that's shifted over 100 episodes for both PerfBytes and you guys, is that shift from who's listening, like the demographics of who's listening over time. So one is just, you don't get permissions. And think of the COE, you outsource a COE, and even those people may have even lesser permissions to try these new techniques, Brian, to your point, right? It's just, you have to jump through hoops and whatever, and we're not prepared for that. So you can change your thinking, but if you don't change their permissions and just the role, then they can't do that. And the second thing is just entrenchment. The status quo is the most powerful force in the universe. So someone who's addicted to late game load testing is going to keep doing that until they start seeing some new techniques happen in development. So I think it's still smart for us as practitioners and teachers or people being inspirational or evangelizing these new techniques to attach to the people that have the power to try them. And even like I'm saying, even compared to the conferences that I've been to in the last 10 years, people even in the testing space now who are always entrenched in LoadRunner and late game load testing, they're even walking in now saying, I don't even know what LoadRunner is. So I'm right. Picking up, early game load testing. I'm doing build my own stuff with Python or building it in .NET, whatever you're doing. They're doing it themselves. And they're like, but I want to learn some testing stuff. And I knew you were doing performance stuff at STP. So I went. So same kind of thing.
So to kind of, sum up what I just learned or kind of repeat on what I believe continuous performance engineering can look like in the lower level environments. If you are in a dev environment and you have your Jenkins builds, your Jenkins pipelines or Bamboo, whatever it is, build it, deploy it, and run your set of unit tests, your functional tests. Some things that I sometimes advocate is, use an HTTP-based testing tool, whether it's JMeter or something else, test your APIs, and then run the same test maybe with 5 concurrent threads to at least get some basic kind of load on it. And then let this whole pipeline not run longer than 5 to 10 minutes, I would say, right? Try to get as much in as possible. And then at the end of that test, then look at your monitoring data, your database data. And then if you do this on a continuous basis, then you can really trend it build to build and also to build comparison and basically see if a code change has a significant, let's say, regression on one of these performance metrics. Right, and that's kind of what it is. And what we've been doing, Mark, I know you're aware of it, but Captain is the open source project, and part of Captain is the quality gate aspect. And the quality gate implementation uses a library called Pitometer, and basically that's exactly what it does. It automates pulling out data from different sources for a particular time range, and is then using that data and either comparing it with a threshold or with the previous build, and just kind of shows it over time. And I think that's why I also believe that this particular component from Captain will see adoption, at least with our user base, because it basically exactly enables people to do what you've just said. At the end of your build, whether it just runs 5 or 10 minutes, look at key metrics, but do it in an automated and do it in a continuous way. That's what it is.
And Andy, let me ask a question just for anybody who's out there who might be familiar with Captain. Maybe they've heard you talk about it and see it, and they're like, well, we're not really running anything in Kubernetes and all. Is the Pitometer part, can that be separated out and used without the rest of Captain or without being on Kubernetes? Just clarify for anyone listening this way.
So to clarify, what we are... So Pitometer is a library that can be used on its own. But what we're doing right now, and that's happening in 0.6. So right now we're working on 05. Depending on when this airs, 06 may already be out. 06 of Captain will have the capability to just use Captain quality gates on its own. That means you can install Captain and then just use the Captain quality gates through an API. And that means you can just trigger it from a Jenkins pipeline.
That's
so at the
awesome.
end of Jenkins, you say, Captain quality gate, evaluate these metrics. Then Captain will store the results, give you a UI, build-to-build comparison, and all that stuff. Because we believe this is what we've learned over the last couple of months since we've been pitching Captain is there's a couple of use cases that are very appealing. Quality gates is one of them. That's why we also want to make it available, kind of independent. And the second thing is the whole area around self-healing and auto-remediation. That's also something that we will focus a lot of energy on also making this particular piece kind of more standalone available. Yeah.
Awesome. And this all relates to performance, right? When you think about it.
Of course.
Again, I mean, because, sorry to cut you off, Mark. I was just going to say, because a lot of times when I'm talking with you, Mark, I'm thinking from performance from like load testing point of view. And when I'm talking to Andy, I'm thinking broader picture, performance and monitoring. But all these worlds are related, and so if you're someone who's used to listening to Mark and the PerfBytes teams and all, and you're coming more from a load background, this is all related. And same thing, if you're on the monitoring side, anything else, everything, all these pieces fit together. But Mark, I cut you off as you were about to speak.
Well, I was going to say the Captain stuff is great. And just as an aside, whenever I see it, I always think to myself, Captain, oh, my captain, oh, captain, my captain. Remember that?
I think of Captain Kangaroo.
Captain Kangaroos, yes, exactly. But the thing that's also changed over the years of all this podcasting is the prevalence of the cloud actually becoming viable as, the early cloud stuff without Kubernetes, without any of the management stuff built in, without any of APM in it at all, was, it was just enough to get something running, but you still had all the overhead of doing all the work of managing and keeping things going. And nowadays it's like we've automated amazing amounts of stuff where you see the rise of no ops. You see the rise of, hey, my old infrastructure team just got fired and everything's running in AWS. Have a nice day. the strides that Azure has made. Well, a lot of people attacked Azure when it first came out, that it was not ready to be a first-class cloud citizen. And they made some amazing progress just in the last couple of years. And so I think, and the load testing space has evolved as well, as you see things becoming ephemeral within the cloud platform, within the cloud infrastructure itself, the way we operate. All those load testing tools that were built on cloud first kind of existence, they're more viable in a continuous mode of operation. And whereas, and I was one of the first guys to let's do load runner in the cloud on EC2, and it was a beta. And everyone I talked to was like, I'll never use it. Nah, we can't use it. We'll never use it. We'll never use it. And it was like, why not? I mean, we were way ahead of the game. That's like the single biggest thing, to your point, Brian, for me is, if you do this kind of stuff all day long, every day, and you're kind of in touch with everybody that's building stuff, you end up thinking of stuff, solving problems that no one's having. That makes you a terrible product manager. It's just like, see, sir, we're going to have this problem in the future. If I could, put you in a time machine in a TARDIS and take us forward, I'll show you what we're going to run into next. And but it does make it entertaining to sort of help people take a few steps towards continuous operation, early performance testing, putting some things in the cloud, ephemeral load environments, ephemeral test data. I mean, that's a huge thing with large database testing, and testing at scale, being able to, now that we're better at being able to launch environments at different scale. Here's a 50% scale, 10% scale environment. And it's almost exactly perfectly that way. In the old days, it was just like, oh, that crappy old hardware almost can't be compared on any scale to new hardware. Now that we're in the cloud, it's like, this is this. And think about serverless. Think of some of the load testing vendors that are doing stuff, generating load out of serverless stuff. That's pretty exciting because no one wants to buy a load generator. So, yeah. All right. So run a serverless load generator, and then you're not paying for it at all when it's not there. So that's a lot of these innovations have changed how we're able to employ some of these cool new ideas, which to me, were ideas that I would hope could come to fruition over the last 10 years.
Another interesting trend that I see, especially in the cloud native space, and for those that are, mainly I think building new apps from scratch, is the ability to deploy a new build side by side in production with your, let's say, main branch or main canary, right? We talk about canary releases. And then, either really do a canary deployment where you open up, let's say, 10% of the traffic, the real user to the canary, or just do traffic duplication and basically send traffic from production to your, let's say, new version, and see how that performs compared to the version that is currently in production. So I think that's also interesting. Another concept that I've seen, and the name slipped my mind on what the approach is, but basically doing the same thing of traffic mirroring. So let's assume version 1 is in prod, and now you have version 2 coming along. So you basically deploy version 2 and another copy of version 1 next to it, and basically give mirrored traffic to these two versions, 1 and 2. Now, the reason why you also do 1, because if you start up a new app, then you obviously have a different performance behavior in the beginning. So in order to really make it comparable, you keep your regular production traffic on, let's say, 10 nodes, and then you add 2 additional nodes for the new version, and then another 2 nodes for another version 1, and then let the traffic go against it. And so it's easier to compare. Yeah. So I thought that's also interesting.
Yeah, that's a kind of the Gorenka's talks on Facebook is just using real testing with real load. And, there's some interesting data issues for certain environments, certain industries. You got to work around those. And sometimes I think 10 years ago, DBAs wouldn't even have the conversation with you. And then because performance testing becomes an impossibility so much, eventually those guys starve for oxygen, and they're like, okay, I really have to get some numbers. Let's figure out the very complex sometimes data situations where I can run load against a new version without real users, or sometimes you have opt-in stuff for customers. They opt me in, copy my profile over to the test system, and I'm happy to do some stuff like that. Yeah. One of the other things on the list that I put to you guys in 100 episodes, do you remember a favorite episode? I know that's like asking you which one of your children is a favorite child. Of course, Andy and I don't have kids, so Brian, that's really just for you.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say because it's a favorite at the time, and that's the same as with children. Like, my one daughter might be my favorite this week, and then she's a jerk next week, so my other daughter is my favorite, right? Or sometimes neither of them are. And I lament the fact that I ever had kids, and I'm thinking, what the heck did I do? Why are we so stupid that we keep having kids? But wait, did I say that out loud? So I think it's more like timely because, like, if you asked me a year ago what was my favorite episode, would be different. 2 years ago, it would have been different. I remember way back, I forget who we were talking with. It was about someone who goes in and they reevaluate everything they're doing at a company and help them get onto more of a different track and introduce performance into different areas of the thing. But recently, so I'll stick to recently. Right, recently, my favorite talks have been with Adrian Hornsby from AWS, I believe, Andy, right?
Oh, yeah.
So he was talking about chaos engineering and resiliency testing and resiliency engineering, which to me resonated so much because, again, my background is from load testing, performance testing, and all this, and I saw a lot of parallels between the two, where it's, you're going to test something. You have a hypothesis, which maybe you don't do in load testing anymore, as you said earlier, but you're running an experiment, right? And that's what most of load testing is, at least in the earlier days when I was doing it, is I'm going to run an experiment, observe what happens, take back whatever I can and figure out why this thing happened, and then figure out how we can get past it. Very similar is going on in chaos engineering, where this is about, if you heard about the chaos monkey, pull the plug on something, what happens? Does your system survive? Does it not? And that also ties into the resiliency engineering, where if you do have something go down, what happens to your application? Do you get the fail whale page, or is most of your site still working, but that one place has a nice, kind message saying, "Hey, we're experiencing problems right now. Please try again in 30 minutes while we resolve this problem." But the rest of the site might still be available for to engage your customer with, or so that all kind of ties in. And the reason I love that so much is because, again, it's all performance based, right? It's all, kind of those related to a lot of those what if load scenarios. What if suddenly we got a spike of traffic? What happens if the database crashes? Do we have a caching mechanism on top? How can we make it so that we shock-proof the system? And they even have, Adrian was going over with us, if you recall way back when Souders came out with his, WebPerf checklist, they're starting to come up with I don't think they've formalized it yet, but he was going over a lot of principles of a resilient app. If you're going to be in the cloud, make sure of course, the whole idea is being in the cloud. Make sure you're in 3 availability zones. So when one goes down, you still have 2 up. 2 go down, you still have 1 up. And you have time, so there's all these little, it's just really, I don't know. I loved it. That's all I can say.
I like that.
What about you, Andy?
Well, I would say similar like you, the initial answer, depending on kind of which time frame. Like more recently, it would definitely be Adam Thornhill was amazing when he talked about your code is a crime scene and how to analyze all that.
Yeah.
That was great. In the very beginning, I loved that we had people like Goranka from Facebook or Gene Kim on the call, right? I mean, who would have thought that we can even ever attract people of their caliber to get on this on the podcast? But one thing that I remember and maybe also more vividly because I've been since working with them very closely is Nestor and Abir from Citrix. Right? They were just great and talk about their traditional ops to agile transformation. I believe that's what the episode was called. And that was great, right? It was more like, what did they do? How did they change at Citrix to become a more agile organization? Yeah.
And you know what I loved about that one, Andy? They were in the middle of it. They weren't, sometimes you talk to people and they're just starting out, so they talk about their plans. A lot of times, especially in the DevOps conferences, we hear about people who came out on the other side and they're telling their stories. They were right in the middle. Yeah. So they gotten past a few humps and they've got a whole, it's a long road ahead. So it was really fun because we got to hear the stuff they did and all the stuff they're kind of scared to move forward into because they know how hard of a road it was so far. So it was, that was a really cool one for sure.
Yeah.
And then I also remember the episode that I recorded in Mark's house. So see,
that was over. That was some whiskey or something, right? That's what was one of your favorites.
I learned a lot of things from Mark. Yeah. That's one of them. No, but it was a really good time. And 100 episodes. Who would have thought that we're still here?
Yeah.
And
So the one more thing I would bring, my favorite recently, again, I'll go with Brian, kind of in the recent world, was the DevOps conversation you had with Emily Friedman. I'm an Emily Friedman fan.
Yeah.
She's she does some great stuff. That was actually a really, really cool. The DevOps.
That was the Spartans talk,
yeah,
right?
DevOps for Dummies and kind of the way she approaches that stuff is pretty cool.
Her book is out now.
Yeah, totally.
By the way, for anyone listening, because I remember we were talking about it, I think, on the podcast, but the book's been out for several weeks, a month or two, maybe now.
Yeah.
3 months probably by the time the series.
Yeah. The other most important thing that we may note on here as well is that Alois has been on 5 times.
What are you tracking?
Yeah, of course. Well, it's a competition. Like if
We
I
used to
started
have
this,
that, right? That's from the early days.
Well, no, he had one like within the last. I mean, it's within the last.
He did a captain talk. He did a captain talk.
but 5 times, really? Is he the all-time? Is he the current leader?
Well, if you don't count,
he had
the
his own episode once.
He does.
He had his own episode once.
Yeah, if you don't count the Dynatrace Perform event stuff,
we don't count those.
We don't,
and those aren't counted in this 100.
Yeah, that's fine.
So
then there you go. Alois has been on there more than me.
So basically, what I hear is that your ego is basically hurt.
Well, I have goals, Andy. I have aspirations.
The fragile male ego. You should go on Martha's show and ask her to talk about your fragile male ego.
There you go. I do have a question. Some people might not know. I mean, there's Pure Performance, and then there's Pure Performance Cafe. They're in the same feed, but how do you guys differentiate between sort of cafe episodes and other episodes?
Good question. Yeah, I would say the cafes are. I think we started them when I was running around with my hand mic at different conferences and interviewing people. We try to keep them short, like 5 to 10 minutes. Somebody at a conference, maybe one of the product managers on the Dynatrace side. So more specific to either a conference or also Dynatrace content. Whereas the Pure Performance episodes are typically longer, at half an hour to an hour. And we have a guest and we elaborate much deeper and broader in a certain topic.
Yeah.
See, and to me, it's a lot simpler. To me, cafes for talking about Dynatrace, Pure Performance is about talking about performance, not specifically Dynatrace. I mean, Dynatrace comes up here and there, right? Because we are talking about performance and monitoring and stuff, but it's not. A lot of times when Andy's at conferences, a lot of them, Andy, have been our own conferences or DevOne and things like that. Where it's talking about people about things about Dynatrace. And as you know, we try not to make this podcast a marketing arm of Dynatrace. I mean, obviously, we're with Dynatrace and we don't hide the fact. And we hope maybe some people are like, oh, those guys are talking about cool stuff. Who do they work for? That kind of stuff. But to me, it's much more of that. And sometimes Andy will come back with stuff because I would be fine with if Andy gave me a bunch of field recordings from a conference and they weren't Dynatrace centric. I mean, we could always theoretically string them together and put them on Pure Performance. But yeah, I guess there is part of that conference part. I never thought about that, Andy.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And the people might not know if you actually go to the feed. This is the 100th Pure Performance actual episode, but you guys have like 200 episodes if you count the cafe and the Pureform, and you've done double that in the time that you've been doing this podcast since just the last 3 years.
Right. And the numbered ones are the ones that we release on schedule. So we release on a 2-week schedule. It's been 3 years now, Andy? I think we figured out
2016.
Yeah, 2016. Yeah, wow. Yeah, 2016.
It was like in April or something. I think April or May was the first one. So it's been pretty awesome. I got to say, I've been fortunate for Andy and I. Dynatrace lets us do this. I have my roles. Andy is more of he gets to run around and talk at conferences and do a lot of fun. I'm like a sales engineer. I have like a 9 to 5 where I have to engage with customers and help the sales cycle, and also the fact that they I mean, this fits naturally into Andy's job description. This does not fit into my job description. Right. So I've been fortunate that all of my management has been like,
I want to correct you. I defined my own job description.
See, there you go.
Right? That's what it is. Nobody asked me to do it. I just did it.
He's a perform evangelist.
Right. Yeah. But if I were to try to start being like, no, I'm going to go to these conferences, they're like, no, you're not.
That was part of my initial job description, obviously.
Yes. Yeah. So it's just been awesome that I can do it, right? So,
yeah. Of course, it's awesome.
Yeah,
it's great.
That's why. Oh, come on!
Yes. Don't edit it out.
You have to beep it.
Yeah,
yeah. I had to beep you on an Ask PerfBytes episode recently, and I forget what I used. I used a fun beep. I didn't use just a beep.
Was it a horn? Little. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Good. I have a mouth like a sailor.
So continuous performance to kind of circle back to.
Wait, Andy, you're not summariting, are you?
No. But okay. I just want to say, Mark, thanks for your work on continuous performance. I learned a lot, and it's great. I mean, it's something that you've been doing for a while, and still every time when I bring it up, it just brings what's it called? What's the right description? It brings sparkles in the eyes of people when I explain to them what you have already been doing for the last couple of years. When I bring up the PayPal example, and so I think let's continue advocating for continuous performance, and let's share with the community on the different approaches. I really like what you said earlier. Maybe the days of the traditional load tests are at some point over. That's also why we see also the testing tool vendors are kind of reinventing themselves and what they're doing. For instance, what Neotis is doing with getting closer to the developer, and I think that's some of the vendors are seeing that trend as well, and that's great.
I was teaching recently, just last week in Boston, and the thing that sparked most of the people is when I refer to performance decision making in the continuous context, and people don't realize it's like, am I making a decision in my code, in my configuration that is performance related? And what am I basing that decision on? Is it based on a knowledge base article that I looked up somewhere in the web, and maybe that fits me or not? Am I basing it on fear or previous experience of failure? Like, what are you basing your decision on? And wouldn't you rather base that decision on actual measurements from the code that's sitting the build before, operations the week before, actual data driven decisions? You still are going to figure out how to make that decision, but you're making it now with real data. And to me, that understanding how your organization makes decisions around performance, that's what opens up the opportunity. Well, could I make that decision sooner? If I knew X and Y, I would do it in dev. I would set that setting in dev and away we go. Or each environment would have their own configuration. Oh, I can do that with the continuous deployment tools. Easy. So the thing is, if you don't tell people that they're empowered to make choices and decisions at any time based on real data and real measurements, if they don't feel empowered to make those decisions, then it, like you say, Brian, it just becomes a dead-end street. They're like, well, I have great ideas, but I can't do them. So to me, empowerment is probably the most important thing we can do to help people get into the modern continuous performance. And education through podcasts like Pure Performance are essential in that empowerment. So,
and I want to bring this a step further. And I know I'm again stealing or borrowing from a slide that I got from you, but you also got it from somebody else, but I don't remember the name. But you once said, true performance engineering is if you actually influence the next line of code that the developers write in, because otherwise all you do is just testing. If you just test and then deliver feedback in the end, but if you can truly impact the way developers think about performance with every line of code that they're writing, and I believe if we give them continuous feedback in a fully automated way and empower them, then this actually happens even faster, right? Because if I continuously get my feedback about what are my code changes actually doing to performance, to scalability, and then, wow, this thing I changed 10 minutes ago is now I get the feedback, oh, now I understand. So I'm changing the way I write my code in the future.
This, in our industry, functionality is still the most talked about thing before anyone writes code. What do you want me to build? Let's be really specific. Let's break it down into stories. Let's make sure it matches an architecture. We're following good practices, standards, etc. And only in the last 20 years have, with the web being huge, is suddenly the second-class citizen now would be, all right, let's also talk about security. But I still have, for the majority, late game static analysis and security. Everyone had to read the book, How to Write Secure Code, and that got a lot of developers woken up. Before you write code, they now have security in their brain. I think our third position, we're still third in the list in performance. And there's lots of reasons that we're not the number one thing in the list, because we still have, the rubber really does still hit the road in operations and infrastructure, which can be a very dynamic environment now compared to 20 years ago. So I still think that's a good order of functionality, security, and then performance as the things to influence somebody's thinking before they sit down and say, now I'm going to write this thing. And by the way, that was Jim Duggan from Gartner way back in the day. And he's like, you're doing performance testing if the code's already been written. You're just validating that it's written right. But if you can influence the code before it gets written, now you're truly engineering. You're thinking about the engineering, the mathematics, the mechanics, the physics of it even, before it actually hits a build.
Hey guys, you're talking about inspiration and sparks and all this, and I just kind of made me want to acknowledge a few people that helped me get where I am in terms of inspiration. So obviously there's you, Mark, right? You helped me out early in my career, and you've been an inspiration since. And Andy, not just saying you guys because you're on the podcast, but Andy, there's all your talks and all the blogs that I read really inspired me to try to do new things. But there's two people I want to mention going back. When I was at WebMD before joining Dynatrace, actually, the first one was, so I was managing the performance team there, and I hired this guy, Robert Ravinsky. Yeah, you've run into him a few times, and I was in a dead end in performance. I was hating it. I was like, I got to get a new career. And he started sharing some articles. He started sharing things about WebPerf, and we started getting these ideas, and he really just got me sparked in, really interested in performance again. He brought me into these new topics. I was just in a siloed world, wasn't even aware of the performance community out there. So big kudos to him for getting my interest going on again. And also the head of operations over there, Teresa, she actually wanted to get the performance team under the operations team so that they could develop an SRE team. This is back in 2010, 11-ish. She had the foresight to see that this is where things should be going, that we should be more baked into the pipeline, more baked into the process, instead of just being under, QA. At one point, the QA manager left, and we ended up under product management, which is a conflict of interest, and she was trying to get us out of there. And in my talks with her about saying like, yeah, let's do this. That's when I first started seeing these potentials that now are reality. And she had the foresight to do that. Of course, our CTO at the time was like, nope. And that was the end of that. And that's when I finally left. But it was because, though, I could almost say it was almost because she tried doing that and it got said no to, that I was like, yeah, I'm out here. It's a dead end here. And I want to try to do something along those lines. But so I just wanted to give a shout out to the Robert and Teresa, as well as you two, because I think, if any of us look back, there are key moments in our careers and key people who have helped us move to the next phases.
Always.
I don't know if you have any.
I do. I have a couple of folks. I have Robert Baminger, who is a very good friend of mine now. He actually initially brought me back then to Segway software from my employer before that. And Segway was the company where, we built Performer. Mm-hmm. But he actually brought me over. And then at Segway, I think I learned a lot from Didi Strasser, and who was my first boss. Mm-hmm. I was basically doing testing on Performer. So I tested Performer with Performer. And then Ernst Ambichl, he was our chief software architect. So he taught me a lot about performance engineering. So I think these are my my heroes and my mentors. Besides Mark, who I also met. I mean, I think every time we talk about it, I forget how long it's been, but it's been a long, long time.
50 years or something.
Like 50
No, it's 16 years. So it's like 2002, 2003. Yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, that was a great gig to work with you. And that was awesome. And I got to speak a little German out of the rusty bucket. That is my German.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's the things that you find the reasons you're inspired. To your point, Brian, is like I hit a brick wall. I'm just getting frustrated. And I've done non-performance things in my career. And, I'm all right, I'll go do some partner work. Okay, well, I'll go over here and do like some other kind of development work, or I'll do PM work. And, it's stuck on me. I can't get away from it. I mean, even when I'm doing other gigs at Microsoft and other roles, someone will call me up inevitably and say, hey, can you come over to the lab? We have, just want to bounce some ideas off of you about what this customer is doing. 4 hours later and a messy whiteboard. And I'm like, I got to go back and do performance work. Like if it's in you and you can find that, passion's a lame word. It's an addiction, I think. It's complexity. If you love that complexity, that specific kind of complexity, you're going to do great. You'll probably listen to every episode of every performance podcast that you can get your hands on. And I think that's what fuels the three of us and certainly the PerfBytes folks that we talk to. But yeah, I still have certain individuals that come back to me 5, 10, 15 years later who are like, hey, do you remember X, Y, and Z? I'm like, absolutely. You're like, well, I just got back into whatever. And they're like, great. Welcome back. And then a whole new crop of people who are learning for the first time in a context totally different than where we started. So the fact that you guys covered the topics you do that are pushing the envelope just like the industry, I think is fantastic. And that keeps new people coming, a new generation, younger people, could be older people with new techniques, old dog, new tricks kind of thing. But I think it's awesome because those same performance-based decisions are being made about, Kubernetes running a bunch of node apps and expanding stuff. And, you want to write stuff in Python. You want to do serverless. You want to do Lambda. You want to look at code efficiency within Lambda. There you go. You're right on it. It's pretty cool and exciting to keep the flame going, Brian.
Yeah. Well, I think you almost stole Andy's summarator job there a little bit. Sort
of, except for the fact that Andy has given the shout out about certain content and certain slides. And I just want to raise my hand that the 3 circles flow that in Dynatrace became the 4 circles flow from Andy, that I think we shared that not at the kitchen table here, Andy, over some breakfast. So,
yeah, that's true. It was good. Back in,
I'm not saying I own it. You took the inspiration and went to a whole new level.
Yeah. Thank you.
I love seeing that slide because I'm like, I recognize where some of that.
I think Mark just wants to negotiate a couple of points on the how many times has he been on the podcast. He wants to beat Alois.
That's right.
And with this, he wants to bribe us or kind of blackmail us.
Something like that. Yeah, that's right. Or I just want some free swag.
Yeah,
exactly.
So Alois, this is notice to you. Mark's coming after you, so you better get some more topics.
I have some ideas from the new stuff.
I know. I'm just challenging Alois. So Andy, do you have any summarators or that you would like to summarize or summarize?
I think. Not really. I don't want to add anything. I just want to say, hopefully, this is we're still in the initial phase of our podcast, and we still have a lot of topics to go. And hopefully, we will be back in many times before the 200th episode. But definitely want to have you back at the 200th episode and see where we are then. I'm sure there will be a lot of new topics coming up. I'm pretty sure continuous performance, even in 100 topics from now, will still be a hot topic. And I'm also very much looking forward to seeing all of you, like Mark and Brian, at Perform. And hopefully many of the listeners too in the first week of February in Vegas.
That's right. I'm going to be there. And we're going to have a whole bunch like we did last year. earlier this year. We did a whole bunch of sort of episodes, kind of pre-interviews. So we'll have that fired up pretty soon here. So we're going to have tons of cool conversations, and maybe we take a focus that, kind of where with everything that's going on. That would be kind of cool.
And I want to, I just think hopefully we'll have a 200th episode because, I imagine it'll just be some computers speaking binary to each other because they'll all be programming everything anyway. So
it'll be,
we'll be replaced.
Yeah, it'll be WebSockets and AI.
Yeah, we'll have the Google bot talking to the Alexa bot, which if you never saw that was the most amazing thing I've ever seen online. I thought that was going to awaken the singularity when that happened. But I also really want to give a huge shout out to all of our listeners. Obviously, we couldn't be doing this without you. If we had, 10 listens an episode, they'd be like, yeah, you guys are done. So thank you to everybody who listens, who continues to listen and to put up with our, my bad jokes, I should say. Andy, I don't think you know how to make a joke, so it's just my jokes.
Terrible.
I want to add to this. I mean, I'm in the fortunate situation to travel a lot and actually meet a lot of people face to face. And thanks for those of you that come to me and say that the podcast is something you listen to and that you learn, and that definitely encourages us. So please keep giving us the feedback, whether it is through Twitter, email, or also if you have a chance to meet us face to face. Very much appreciated.
And through Twitter, it would be, you can tweet at pure_DT. You can do an old-fashioned email at pureperformance@dynatrace.com. And I will mention, since you're on the phone, Mark, Alois sent me an old-fashioned email. I sent me an email with a picture of an old-fashioned drink and the recipe. So another way he's got you beat. He's just superior to you.
Oh, really? How much? Would you like some scotch with that?
Yes, I would.
Okay, all right. I can work that.
All right. So thank you, everybody.
Accepted.
Thank you, Mark. Mark, thank you so much for getting this rolling and continuing to be a great inspiration for us, and hopefully, I think, hundreds or millions of other people.
Yes, congratulations to you guys, and keep it going. I would say bring more new people. If you can find somebody who has a gift for podcast and talking, a little bit extroverted, and they're also completely motivated and addicted to performance stuff, bring them into the podcast world. Leandro's doing great, and we had with such fun. Bring a new podcaster into your game, and it'll keep you going and expand what you're doing. So best of luck for the future, and I look forward to many, many more conversations.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.